Howdy! Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas, the #1 state for startups in the US. Thousands of entrepreneurs, programmers, and designers gather day and night, in person and online, for meetups, classes, and coworking. And with boots on the ground in Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, we meet the best entrepreneurs in Texas and introduce them to investors, employees, mentors, and customers. According to Pitchbook, Capital Factory's been the most active early-stage investor in Texas since 2010. Now, Capital Factory's Center for Defense Innovation is 20,000 square feet of innovation space with the Army Futures Command, the Air Force AFWorks, the Defense Innovation Unit, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the Texas Military Department, and other government innovators on site. More than just a physical place, it's a community of regulatory hackers and entrepreneurs and innovators. Now, one thing that's very special about the Center for Defense Innovation is that we have multiple government innovation units together in one place. That doesn't usually happen. Another thing is that because it's a public-private partnership and not a government facility, it's accessible and allows for the serendipity required for innovation. Fed Supernova is the synergy of combining Capital Factory's Texas Startup Manifesto with the massive defense industry momentum in Texas. Now, we'll wrap things up on Wednesday with the Autonomous Drones and Mobility Investment Challenge, where one startup will actually walk away with a $100,000 investment. But between now and then, Microsoft is presenting a unique look at developments in space tech with Brigadier General Stephen Buttal and CEO of Venus Aero, Sassy Duggleby. IBM will be talking about quantum technology and how we might see it in our daily lives. MITRE will dive into how digital engineering can accelerate capabilities and lower barriers to entry. And the Army Application Lab will showcase how the Army will bend to business over the coming years and talk about Project Convergence, Spartan, and other new programs on the horizon. So please make the most of it. Fill out your profile on Hopin, open up the chat window and type some questions, and turn on your video when you get a chance. And come visit us in person when things open back up again later this year.
Thank you, Josh. Welcome, everyone, to Fed Supernova, presented by Microsoft. I'm Patricia Baumhart, your host today. I'm an emerging tech strategist with expertise in quantum computing, cybersecurity, water tech, and autonomy. I also serve as a volunteer in a range of endeavors, including as an NDIA Lone Star Chapter Director. I've worked with some of the speakers today, and I follow all of the speakers' work, forging the path forward toward achieving what's possible with quantum computing. Today, for our track, Quantum Computing, presented by IBM, we've got one incredible program with some of the most exciting voices in quantum. Our keynote, the billion-dollar question: what relevant problems can quantum solve today, is with Dr. Nazario with IBM and Dr. Michael Haydick with Air Force Research Lab Information Directorate. We have a fireside chat making quantum accessible to startups and government with Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas Istep, Program Manager at DUI, and Worley, CEO of Strangeworks. We have a panel, National Security Concerns with Emerging Technologies, with Chris Larakis of IBM, Bob Sorensen of Hyperion Research, and Steve Reinhardt of Quantum Computing, Inc. That's followed by Capital Factory's Startup Showcase. Also, there's networking later in the day. This is really popular with our community, and I'll tell you why. It's a chance to meet other attendees serendipitously, just like in events in the real world. You might meet a new client, a partner, or a mentor in quantum. Give it a try. I hope you're excited about things to come. Before we start on our keynote, we'll hear opening remarks from our partners at IBM. Please give a virtual round of applause for Dave McQueenie, Chief Innovation Officer at IBM.
Well, thank you, Patricia. And it's our pleasure to support this event. As I'm sure you all know, we've been present in Austin for a long time. I first started spending time with the engineering team in Building 45, the old Rusty Bucket down in Austin in the late 1980s. And I hardly recognize the place when I go back today. The growth in our site, the growth in the city, and the incredible startup community. It's a wonderful place to be, a wonderful place to be working, and we're delighted to support this event. One of the things that I find interesting talking about any of the new technologies that we're concerned with is thinking about the imperative for innovation. It probably wouldn't surprise you that as the Chief Innovation Officer for IBM, I do think a lot about what represents good innovation, effective innovation. How do you define it? How do you measure it? After all, in technology, the first question you always get, whether you're talking about security or cloud or quantum computing, is what do you mean by that? And so when people ask me innovation, what do you mean by that? Here's what I think. So first of all, when I was thinking about this about a year ago, I was actually talking to the quantum computing team, and we were having a very interesting discussion about all the different parameters that make a quantum computer useful. And you'll hear a lot more about that later today. And this idea that there are sort of orthogonal vectors that define a space, things that could be multiplied together to form areas and volumes, I thought was an interesting idea. And I thought, what would be the dimensions of the space in which innovation lives? And I think the first dimension you're always going to be concerned with in innovation is speed. How fast can you go from an idea, either in a person's mind or in a laboratory or in a scientific setting, into actual use in a mission or a business process in the hands of an end user? That whole chain of speed is probably always going to be the first thing on our mind about innovation, and arguably an incredibly important one. What would the second dimension be? Something that's kind of orthogonal to that, where the product of the two represents an organization's ability to innovate. And I would suggest that the second dimension to consider for innovation is depth. How much capacity do you have in your people, in your facilities, in your experience? How hard a problem can you solve? How deep can you go on the science? Certainly, to compete in semiconductors today, you have to go literally down to the atoms and the quantum mechanics to make any sense of how to build modern devices. Quantum computers arguably are the same, and then some. And so I think that if we take the first dimension as speed and the second dimension as depth, we want to excel at both of those to get the biggest effect. Because just running fast is great, but if you run 2 weeks faster than a competitor, then you're 2 weeks ahead. But if you have to spend a decade cracking an incredibly difficult scientific problem, you could get a very, very long lead and a very, very strong position on something. And to fill this out, a third dimension, and the one that over time I have thought maybe is the most important, I like to call context, which is how well do you know how to map your depth to the problem you're solving? How well do you understand the domain in which you're solving a problem? How well do you understand how to make those long-term investments so that they'll have the biggest effect on the eventual use? And I think the discussion about applications for quantum computing zeroes right in on this idea of context. And so I thank the quantum computing team for putting that seed of an idea in my mind. It's not just a valid thing for evaluating a quantum computer, but it's also, I think, a very useful way to think about innovation with speed, depth, and context. And if you're wondering about your institution and how effective you are at innovating, you might think about measuring yourself along those three axes and forming kind of an innovation volume, if you like. And so again, reflecting on this for a long time, speed will always be first to mind. Depth will always be important for a serious competitive advantage. But I think at the end of the day, it almost always is going to come down to context. The institution or the individuals that can put together the deep capability with the deep understanding of the mission are the ones that are going to win. So again, coming back to where I started with Austin, a number of institutions there, including ourselves, that can go incredibly deep. The military presence that's coming, the military labs that are represented, the academic community, the startups bringing an excellent capability of speed, forming an innovation ecosystem that no one company has to do every one of these axes perfectly. It's really about, a group that you pull together to solve an individual problem. So again, for all those reasons, supporting this event was a great pleasure, a great honor for us. And Patricia, thank you for the privilege of making some introductory comments for this session.
Thank you, Dave. So first up, for our keynote fireside chat, I'd like to welcome up Dr. Nazario from IBM and Dr. Michael Haydock, Deputy Director of the Air Force Research Lab Information Directorate. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. It's a delight and an honor to be here today with you, Mike, with you, Patricia, and with everyone that is joining us. I work at IBM Quantum. I'm the technical lead for quantum theory and applications. I must say these are going to be great 20 minutes where Mike and I will be sharing our perspectives on one of the most transformative technologies that we have seen in decades and what we're doing to accelerate its development. So Mike, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience, and then maybe we can get started?
Sure. Thank you very much for the intro, and thanks to the invite of the organizers to be here at Fed Supernova. It's a thrill and an honor to speak to such an audience and really to talk about what we're doing in quantum, across many different areas, not just computing, but quantum information science for the Air Force. I am at the Information Directorate in Rome, New York. I'll talk a little bit about that later on, but one of the technical directorates of AFRL. And I currently serve as the Deputy Director working for Colonel Lawrence, who is our Director of Information here in Rome. And as part of my job, I also serve as the Quantum Information Science Coordinator across all of AFRL, kind of overseeing the research that's going on and helping to guide and shepherd it and really work on operationalizing quantum for the Air Force.
Awesome. So I think, Mike, that is only natural to start this discussion describing what is quantum computing and what is the promise that has all of us so excited and here talking. And perhaps the easiest way to do that, I think, is by comparison with classical computing. So remember that a conventional computer encodes and manipulates data in bits as zeros and ones. And to do a calculation, it applies a series of operations or gates to that data encoded in zeros and ones. Now that's what's happening behind the scenes when you, for example, use an app in your cell phone. Now, a quantum computer processes information in a fundamentally different way. You can now have states that are linear combinations of several states, each one with a different phase, and you encode your problem in them. Now, you apply the right set of time-ordered operations, that's what we call a quantum circuit, so that you entangle those states and interfere them. And that things that are out of phase cancel each other. That's how noise canceling headphones work. And things that are in phase add up and get amplified. So just the same, by interfering quantum states and encoding the problem, you eliminate a lot of the incorrect possibilities and are left with a few possible outcomes containing the solution. Now, that ability to encode problems in superpositions of states, to entangle them and interfere them, gives us a huge advantage and lets us solve problems that are impossible even for the most advanced supercomputers. For example, studying materials. Electrons in materials are interacting with one another and with the nuclei, and those interactions grow exponentially as you add more and more atoms. We know the theory and the equation that describe that behavior, but we can't solve it for more than dozens of particles because solving it uses an enormous amount of memory and computational resources. So we can really only do approximations. But with quantum computing, we can use quantum mechanical properties in circuits to solve those equations and to determine the behavior of materials. And similarly, we have algorithms that improve machine learning processes or to solve algebraic problems or graph problems. Now, I want to emphasize that it's not that quantum computers will replace conventional computers. They will always work together. Now, after all, the world works with classical data, so data that goes in and comes out is classical. And also that quantum computers cannot solve all problems, but particular ones that are too complex because they take too much time or memory for classical computers to solve. So they'll really, complement and augment each other. But now I've spoken a whole lot, so let me shut up for a moment. And Mike, why don't you tell us about, why you are excited about quantum computing and what is AFRL doing in this field?
Excellent. Oh, well, awesome introduction. That was really exciting to hear and a great, simple explanation, I think, for our audience. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes here, and I promise not to go on too long, but really just giving some background as to where AFRL's interests are in quantum and kind of a little bit about what we do at the lab. So those who may not be familiar, Air Force Research Lab is the scientific research and development arm for the Air Force. We're headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and we currently have about 11,000 employees, which is military, government, civilians, and contract positions. We execute a budget of about $6 billion per year across 9 different states. So many locations spread throughout the U.S. And interestingly enough, we also have locations, 3 international locations, really just speaking to the globalization of technology, those being in the UK, Japan, as well as Santiago, Chile. And AFRL's history goes back, believe it or not, 100 years. If you go back to some of the foundational work that it did for the really the Army Air Forces before the Air Force stood up. But why are we interested in quantum? And that's where I really want to hit upon in the next few minutes here is quantum information science research is done across 6 different locations within AFRL. And I won't spend too much time going into exactly those locations, but just talk about now some of the areas that we work on. And the 4 main areas are timing, sensing, communications, and networking. We lump those 2 together, as well as computing. And just to hit upon some of the applications of the other areas, and we really see timing and sensing as being kind of near-term applications for quantum. And the nice part, though, is there's a lot of similarities and a lot of work that can be leveraged as you go towards some of the more difficult areas that we're going to talk about today, such as building a error-corrected quantum computer. So, for example, with clocks and timing, it's really the stability of the clocks, improving holdover times and refresh rates for clocks. Now, we combine those with quantum sensors. Here we're talking about how you bring things like gradiometers, gravimeters, magnetometers, gyros into play and really take clocks and sensors and maybe, if you're in a GPS denied or degraded environment, we always hate to travel somewhere and you lose signal. Well, it's a real problem for the Air Force if that happens. So how do we have backups for that? How do we work through that? So we call this long duration unaided inertial navigation systems that we see a great application for that. Now with communications and networking here, longer term, but really so important. And really, again, I think linking together what is going to be needed for on the computing side of things. Here we're talking about, of course, security, low probability of intercept communications, secure encryption, but also how can you link those clocks together? How can you have an entangled clock network with quantum repeaters that will be coming along, as well as things like data fusion, when you can have time transfer, very stable time transfer, and moving things amongst different platforms. And finally, let's hit upon why we're all here today, really talk about quantum computing. And specifically here, to stress up front, the Air Force and AFRL, our strategy is to partner with folks who are developing the hardware. So folks like IBM, which I'll spend a few minutes talking about. But, we don't develop the hardware. We just don't have the resources and the expertise to develop it. So we're really interested in the application space and where can we have value and provide value for the operational Air Force with quantum computing. And we're so thrilled to be in on the ground floor of algorithm development and at this early stage where we can really get our hands kind of dirty and see where we can start applying quantum computing. So as the hardware progresses, we've already got a great start on it. So some specific work, and I know you'll hit upon it as well, but certainly coding to specific systems is so important for us as well. The hardware is very unique, so how do we work on doing that? We've had a great partnership with IBM where we've worked together as a hub member, and this allows us to bring in different partners. For example, we have about 9 users, rapidly growing, different partners, industry, academia, really working on problems that are of interest to the Air Force as well as the user community out there. In the interest of time, let me just hit upon a couple other things we're doing. Quantum walk circuit designs, being able to, certainly quantum walks are wide area of applications. creating circuit techniques for coin-driven quantum random walks, and again, optimizing for IBM chips. How do we design for the NISQ-friendly era, those circuits that we can then test experimentally, really tailored towards IBM's current qubit connectivity. And as that changes, we'll work on scaling up that as well. And speaking of scaling, certainly as we move into higher dimensions, how do we then translate the work we're doing here as well? And last, quantum machine learning. So certainly machine learning, obviously a big interest to the Air Force, wide array of application space. But really, how do we look to identify those computational bottlenecks and current algorithms, implement subroutines using things like QuizKit, and evaluating the performance of quantum machine learning algorithms on current hardware, and then allowing that to scale up. So just quickly hitting upon a couple more things here. 2 events that we had recently. First one was our Quantum Collider, and this is all about building the ecosystem. So just a minute on this. This was where we brought together industry, government, small businesses, small business technology transfer. Back in June, we did a phase 1 award of 35 awardees, each getting $750,000 or $150,000 each. That totaled about $5 million. Then took it to phase 2 in December, where we kind of necked that down. We had awards, much larger awards of $1.5 million, 23 awards, 15 businesses across these 4 areas of quantum. And again, kind of pushing along that research. Then speaking of that, accelerating the research, we did a Quantum U international event, what we call the Tech Accelerator. And this was university focused, where we brought together some of the best universities in the world. We had them kind of do a bake-off. We invited 36 universities. We ended up making 18 awards, small seedling awards of $75K each. So totals awards of just over $1.35 million. But really reaching new partners. And again, just the basic research level, accelerating that technology. Last but not least, when we talk about our ecosystem, I want to talk about our Innovare Advancement Center. So this is located just outside the gate here at Rome Laboratory, or the Information Directorate. And this is a partnership with New York State and Oneida County, and it's developing a facility, a 40,000 square foot facility for really foundational work. And quantum's a big part of it, not the only part of it. We're also doing artificial intelligence, machine learning, cyber technologies, unmanned aerial system development. But really, how can we partner? How can we reach small businesses, non-traditional partners, international partners, and really develop foundational technologies, push that technology along, and really bring in the best of all worlds in there. As part of that, we're developing 2 large quantum laboratories in there, each of about 1,500 square feet, state-of-the-art facilities with our 3 qubit technologies that we're most interested in, that being photons, ion traps, and superconductors. So just opened up this past fall, just gearing up. I'll be talking more about this backstage, but just want to kind of give you a flavor for really the Air Force's strategy in terms of partnership and outreach. So Zara, back to you. I think, would really love to hear a little bit more about applications that IBM's working on and kind of the future apps, if you will.
Sure. That's really impressive, all the activities that you guys have at AFRL. So I hope that everybody joining takes advantage of those. In terms of applications, let's talk about that. We see 3 main categories of problems where quantum computing should have a big impact. You mentioned quantum walks, that's one. We have quantum simulations and algebraic problems. Quantum simulations are promising because you're essentially using nature's law to simulate nature itself. These are problems in physics, in material science, and chemistry. One would expect, for example, some problems in condensed matter physics being able to be tackled near term. People are also using quantum simulations to explore their applicability for things like simulations of thermodynamical properties or photochemical processes for materials design, or investigating reactions that can elucidate how to make materials resistant to different environmental conditions. We're working a lot with quantum kernel methods. That's another area that we see as very promising. And here, for example, you have data that you cannot separate by linear methods, but you can by mapping it to a higher dimension. And because the space formed by the possible quantum states of qubits is itself a high-dimensional space, you can use a circuit that is classically hard to map the data to the qubit state space and then classify it there by linear methods. And in fact, last year, our team discovered a quantum circuit that leads to a superpolynomial advantage for classification of classical data over all possible binary classical classifiers. Other problems that we're exploring include improving fraud detection, performing risk analysis, and investigating problems relevant, of course, for defense and aerospace. But let me tell you a little bit about how we see the future. We see it as solutions enabled by quantum classical compute. And what I mean by that is the union of quantum and classical operations in non-trivial ways, where by trading off quantum for classical resources and vice versa, you can expand what you can do with the resources that you have at your disposal. And this is powerful in many ways. We showed, and you will see more of this next week at the APS March meeting, how you can use this to scale the size of molecular simulations that we can address today. By splitting a long circuit into a set of smaller circuits and using classical computations to force the entanglement and produce the full computation, you can cut in half or more the size of the machine that you need to do that simulation. And this interplay of quantum and classical compute will continue to be ever more important and let us do more with less and sooner. So it's really exciting. Now, what do you think, Mike, in terms of what do you see both for problems where quantum computers may play a role and for challenges that we also face today?
So one of the things that always strikes us is, how do you get more people involved in quantum computing, right? How do you bring it out to the masses, if you will? And I know IBM's been a leader of that, certainly, in putting the systems on the cloud. And that was one of the things we, debated early on, how early to get into algorithm development. But it seems like, certainly, even going back a few years ago, that the time was right, and it just seems to be exploding. So, certainly from our perspective, workforce development, getting it out there, getting more users across AFRL and our partners in quantum, and seeing, what quantum can do, kind of getting their hands dirty, or something very interested, that we're very interested in. And of course, the applications you've hit upon them, but certainly combinatorial problems, optimization type problems, logistics type problems for the Air Force, something that we're very interested in, and that we would have certainly an impact today as well. So do you have any thoughts on what IBM's role in workforce development is as well, and certainly how you're getting it out things internationally, if you will?
Yeah, no, definitely. Just like we share that belief with you guys, we are committed to help build a solid and diverse workforce. We also believe that really being part of a community and embracing that hands-on learning and immersive experiences is the best way to learn and to contribute. And so, to tell you a little bit of what we're doing to support incorporating quantum computing into education curricula, we have now IBM Quantum for Educators that provides teachers and faculty the ability to reserve priority access to systems for use in class demonstrations or for coursework problems. And so it makes them part of a network of colleagues as well. It gives them the support that they need to bring the highest quality education experience to their students. We also have immersive events, like the hackathons are an example. We have global summer schools. We have the Qiskit and Education Awards, some developer certification programs that are available now. And in partnership with the Coding School, we also have high school education that we offer all around the world. And of course, we have the Qiskit textbook, which is open source and is interactive, plus a wealth of material to get started in the Qiskit YouTube channel, including lessons, tutorials, industry discussions, seminars, and a lot more of those things. But communities are essential, one of the best and fastest way to learn. And so, I encourage anybody that would like to try a quantum computer, do so today. You can go to quantum-computing.ibm.com, sign up for an account, and you can start using them today, and you'll find a large amount of resources there as well.
Thank you, Dr. Nazario and Dr. Haydick. Super interesting. Next up, for our fireside chat, making quantum accessible to startups and government, I'd like to invite up our moderator, Rick Mueller, Senior Manager of Advanced Microsystems Group at Sandia National Labs.
Hi, everyone. Patricia, thanks. I'm Rick Mueller. I run the quantum program at Sandia National Labs, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Quantum Systems Accelerator, which is one of the recently funded national QIS research centers that the DOE just funded. One of the things that's really exciting right now is the intersection between the startup communities and quantum information sciences. And we have two really great experts here to talk in the fireside chat. We've got Lieutenant Colonel Nick Estep from DIU, and we've got Worley, who's a well-known entrepreneur in Austin, Texas. So we're going to invite them in now, and I'm going to let them introduce each other, and then we'll start chatting about what the opportunities are for quantum technology. So, Worley, would you like to introduce yourself to the crowd here and talk about the companies you've started and a little bit about why you were interested in getting into quantum?
Sure. My name's Worley. I am Eisenhower Fellow in the space of quantum computing, specifically distributing the educational materials and trying to get more people involved in it. I'm also the founder of StrangeWorks here in Austin, which is a quantum computing startup that focuses basically on quantum infrastructure, not just for computing, but eventually for things like networking and sensors, et cetera. And I've done a couple of startups here. First startup was Chaotic Moon. We started in 2010, was acquired by Accenture. We spun a gaming company out of that was acquired by Zynga. And then, of course, my last adventure before StrangeWorks was a company called Honest Dollar, which we started on March of 2015, launched at South by, and then it was acquired by Goldman Sachs on March of 2016. Spent almost 2 years there on the management team, and then decided to start this primarily because the first business was fun and profit. The second one was try to be that mythical entrepreneur we know doesn't exist. And this time we wanted to do something with a much longer time horizon that's really going to have an effect on the world and the human condition. And so this was a super interesting problem space for us. And I know it sounds weird to be like, we're tired of just like, we grow it and we sell it, we grow it, we sell it, but we have completely different ambitions for this one.
Terrific. Nick, as I mentioned backstage to you, I'm really impressed with what I see in nurturing a startup culture at DoD in general, and at institutions like DIU in particular. And so in addition to introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you're interested in quantum, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that startup culture at DIU, because I think it's something really, really special there.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, at least on the West Coast for me. I'm Nicholas Estep at the Defense Innovation Unit, DIU. I know sometimes in the military we throw around acronyms. I'm active duty Air Force. I've been in the military for about 14 years. I've kind of extended across the entire spectrum of defense acquisition, from the most kind of sensitive and extreme situation to now the more commercial-like approach within DIU. So I kind of have a good broad experience across the board. But at DIU, it is kind of an approach to try to change the conventional theory and thoughts on defense acquisition. I'm not necessarily saying it's broken, but there's ways that can be improved. There's a lot of investment within the commercial domain that we can be leveraging a lot more than traditionally you would think back into 60s or 70s when the DoD was primarily an investor for R&D. So DIU is kind of an attempt to not only address that, say, yes, there are some challenges and improvements that can be made to the defense acquisition structure, but its natural execution of how we can make it different. So, Defense Innovation Unit is actually centered out in the tech hubs. I'm actually out at Silicon Valley. There's also Austin and Boston. We try to make ourselves more commercial-like in our structure. We have a defense engagement team, a commercial engagement team. Even our interactions with industry, we tend to lend ourselves more towards non-traditional and startup-type communities, businesses that don't really have a history or familiarity with working with the DoD or the government in general. And so we try to be as much commercial-like approach as possible in order to try to leverage kind of the dual-use technology that's really critical. So generally, if there's a business case within the commercial and private sector, and we can either tap into that or make small minor modifications for a DoD utility, that's kind of the charter and really where DIU is very effective. DIU has a number of different portfolios: space, autonomy, AI, ML. And I just happen to sit up between the space and the AI on my portfolio, and we actually have ongoing quantum initiative itself, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as we proceed into the chat. But I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the continuing engagement here.
So one of my hopes for what we call the quantum ecosystem is that this is something that can kind of sustain quantum as a field through the ups and downs that it's likely to go through over the next however many years. And I think it's particularly exciting that we've got experts on the entrepreneurial side and on the government side as well. And so I wanted to just probe a little bit about how we can create and nurture a vibrant ecosystem that's going to keep this field thriving. And so I wanted to start with Worley and ask about, as someone who started multiple companies, how can the government support quantum startup companies, particularly given some of the uncertainties that exist in quantum technologies regarding when we're really going to see impactful applications arise from them?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I think that you're seeing funding in quantum kind of go through a lot of turmoil right now, right? This year on the computing side, you've had a bunch of down rounds from companies that were invested in 3 or 4 years ago. Yesterday, you had IonQ go public via SPAC. Of course, you have governments all over the world. France recently said they're putting another 1.8 billion in, Sweden, Finland, etc. And there's a quantum networking act being drafted right now to be passed in the US government to give additional funding to those activities. So I think funding is kind of the Wild West for quantum right now. As far as that support, I believe that the US government should be investing 10, 15, 20 times what they're investing currently, given the importance to national security, the importance to, new material sciences and space travel, all the things that we want to be leaders in. I think these technologies will be very important, whether it be the measurement side or the computing side, or eventually the communications network. But, I think that we're doing a good job. I think we need to do more of the job we're doing right now, frankly. And I think as far as building community goes, look, that's why we started quantumcomputing.com, right? I mean, we've come from this from a standpoint of the opposite side, which is you've got that kind of top-down approach of, the government funds, and then eventually the venture funds, and then the public markets fund, and then consumers fund with dollars. We're kind of in all of those areas on quantum at the same time right now. But on the community side, look, on the computing, there's only a couple hundred people worldwide that matter. And that's not an industry, and that's not enough activity to have the unlikely discovery you had, like with the Wright brothers and flight and all of the big discoveries, whether it be the Industrial Revolution or any revolution thereafter. So I think it's really important to make it much more funded and much less competitive and more collaborative, especially with companies within countries like the United States. There's plenty of room for everybody to work together to bring quantum as a future technology to today.
Wonderful. So Nick, the gauntlet has been thrown down. We need 10 times as much funding in quantum. And so...
Well, wait, if we're asking Nick, we need about 50 times the funding in quantum. I can send you the wiring info if that helps.
but this is what I see as exciting in DoD and in DIU right now, which is that, and again, so I work for a U.S. National Laboratory, so I understand how hard it is to convince your institution to put large amounts of money into experimental endeavors like startup companies. And so part of me wants to, steal Nick's secrets and find out, how you convince your management to do this. But also, I'd like Nick to address the general problem of, to be honest, I think Worley's figure is probably about right. A factor of 10. So if we want to see funding increase further in this area, what kind of assurances do we need to give government that these are good investments?
Well, I mean, so I see quantum as, I wouldn't call it a horizontal integrator, but I mean, it's not service specific. It's not a specific domain. It's kind of like machine learning and artificial intelligence. It benefits a lot of different potential fields. It could be precision navigation and timing, synchronization. If there's a resilient domain in which, GPS is not available, secure communications, these are all, military applications that quantum technologies can feed, and they're at various states of maturity. And I think the DoD has a pretty good cohesive strategy. The Office of Secretary Undersecretary of Defense for Research Engineering has, a whole portfolio and are shepherding and managing a lot of the quantum science investments across the DoD. So, there's a good amount of resources and brain cells that are being put to make sure that, that's a cohesive strategy and roadmap that's being, managed across all the different services and labs and prototyping agencies across DoD. DIU specifically, we sit at a place where, we're not necessarily basic research. If it's proof of physics in the lab, it's probably a little too nascent to be able to actually go and say, hey, what are the actual metrics that can benefit a DoD customer? Because those are the most successful criteria in how you avoid this valley of death. Is yes, I've got this great science, system, and it's extremely novel. But how does that translate to the warfighter, and how can we benefit in the actual environment? And so DIU are looking for those, I wouldn't call them low-hanging fruit, but quantum-based technologies that are more mature and they're ready to go to more of a systems engineering approach. And how do we actually realizing it in an environment that is relevant towards the warfighter itself? So at DIU, one of the active projects we actually have is a quantum-based inertial measurement unit demonstration, and this is quantum-based interferometers. They're have analogous and similar to optical interferometry, but they've been studied for now going on 20 years or so, and so they're into the place where they can actually start taking a step towards realizing an actual relevant environment. And so and here's a great example of non-traditional and startup communities. The actual prototypes that DIU has for quantum IMUs in a constrained environment, think of space or tightly constrained size, weight, and powder terrestrial environments, are more of a startup and non-traditional industry. And so we're taking these companies that have only been around a few years, and then there are only a few dozen or so employees, and we have active engagements with them. And so what they're doing is leveraging. They may not have all the extensive experience for integration and validation of these types of systems for the relevant environment. Think of space, for example, but they may go and partner with some ventures and businesses that do have that experience. And that's a good balance that we are implementing in order to take things out of demonstration, out of the lab environment, and get to prototyping and actually show what kind of metrics we can achieve that are relevant towards the warfighter. And I think that's what's kind of critical is having that breadth of lower technology readiness type of investments in labs and the national facilities and national labs. And then things that are maturing along the way, you start to actually engage in prototyping and make sure that you're capturing the right metrics that are relevant towards the DoD.
Excellent. So Worley, we just heard a good description of what one customer wants, and I imagine that many in the audience right now are people who either are forming startup companies or looking to form startup companies, and so. I don't want you to give away any of your business secrets, but if you're creating a company in this arena right now, how do you convince investors that there's going to be some kind of a near-term payoff? So are there applications you use to motivate people? How do you put a business plan together in that, and how do you get people to kind of buy into your vision for your company?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I'm happy to give all the secrets away. I founded the Deep Tech program at CERN and run it on a yearly basis, and I'm teaching all these secrets at MIT in the Legatum Center. So I don't know that I have any secrets anymore, but look, it's really hard. deep tech is fundamentally a different area because you said, how do you convince investors that there's some near-term payoff? And the fact is you don't, right? That's fraudulent to be like, oh, quantum computing is going to be $400 trillion in 2024, because that's not what's going to happen. So I'll tell you first things don't do what I did, which was say, you could never get your money back. I have no idea. That hasn't worked out great so far. Also don't do the things that I see happening daily. I have kind of a dual split role. So I'm CEO at StrangeWorks, and then I'm a general partner at Ecliptic Capital. And at Ecliptic Capital, it's a $100 million fund. We're doing a lot of more deep tech type stuff. We just kind of fell into that naturally. And looking at it from both sides, it's really, really hard. For Ecliptic, it's different because it's a perpetual fund. So every year it tops up to 100 million, and then we invest that, right? So the difference is when you're going into deep tech and you look at these venture capital funds, a lot of them are on a 10-year horizon, and they're on what's called the European waterfall. So when they exit a deal, they got to wait till all the deals exited and the funds closed for the managers to get paid, because we don't want them going running off. Right. If you look at it, the number one advice I can give to everybody in the audience is, if you're looking to do a deep tech startup, it is more important than ever to diligence the sources of finance you're looking for. So find out what Nick wants and how he's investing and what he's done, and find that out for everybody. Because the biggest mistake I make is startups in general getting upset at vendors saying, well, they didn't fund us. They won't give us a term sheet. They want to, well, okay, well, let's look at the dynamics of it. They're a 10-year fund. They're 7 years in, meaning they're all looking to cash out on the exits they've had in the next 36 months. And you're giving them a proposition that would lock that up and prevent them from getting that money until 2030 or 2032. It's like, you don't have alignment, right? The secret to raising money, or the secret to starting a company, especially in deep tech, is alignment among all the parties. When the needs of the funding sources and the needs of the startup are aligned, magic happens. When the needs of the customers and the needs of the product the startup's creating are aligned, magic happens, right? So it's really going back to a bunch of very, very fundamental things. Know who you're talking to, know what their interests are, know what they're looking to invest in very clearly, because it might be the best answer to just say, we shouldn't talk. We'll call you in a couple of years, right? Sometimes it's just not the right timing. And that happens a lot more in deep tech. I think the other thing is, you've got to be able to sell science fact, not science fiction. Nick mentioned this, and I couldn't agree more. Now, I cheated, right? I've got a team that's worked together between 8 years and 27 years who builds massive software platforms. And so we're more of a software company playing in quantum than we are a quantum company. I mean, I have quantum physicists, but I don't need the machines to be real to start making money. I don't need the stuff, because you've got to build a quantum workforce, and you've got to train them, and you got to start doing IP and discovering algorithms, all that. So we went a little differently. And when we raised our money from Lightspeed and Lux and Ray Lane of Oracle fame, partially the reason they were convinced to write the check, and this is a big factor you cannot overlook, is they look at team, they look at tech, and they look at the timing, right? And so the only thing we convinced them on was the timing. We said, we can get in earlier. We will be bigger. There'll be more of a land grab. The tech, they know we've gotten spades. The team is a proven entity. These guys have been through 2 or 3 exits together, a minimum of 1 or 2. And so, that's really when you're pitching: team, tech, timing. You got to hit those 3. That's what they're looking for in that first round.
Hey, Rick, can I pivot off that?
Yeah, please do.
No, I was going to say, I agree with that. I'll say I've been, pleasantly surprised with some of the solicitations, engagements with industry, particularly on quantum-based technologies. I guess, there's a spectrum of, what it takes in order to get kind of in a stable, defined environment where you have business arrangements in private industry as well as with government. In the quantum technologies, I don't know if it's as, a path of lowest impedance, kind of like maybe a straight analytics company that might be able to buy, raw data product from third-party vendors, but I'm sure it's not, the level of investment and seed required for, a rocket company or building, space hardware and architecture, before you can actually start having revenue streams. So I think it's somewhere in the middle. And so I've certainly been pleasantly surprised with some of the vendors that I'm engaged with that are kind of more of the startup on the startup variety. And I'll go back to, being the DoD customer, the kind of things I would want to hear. I would also, be skeptical of folks that, potential pitches that are just using quantum as a buzzword that, may deem that, there's a frenzy within the DoD that's just, you hit that and you hit bingo, and then you might potentially get funding. I certainly much rather hear about, what's much more likely, what's more realizable and tangible. Tell me that, you're not going to, if you tell me that you're going to field a quantum radar system in the next 3 years, I'm probably going to, be a little more skeptical and cross my arms. But if you tell me, hey, Nick at DIU, there's, quantum inertial measurement systems are pretty advanced, right from the get-go. We've never flown a space quantum based IMU, an atom interferometer in space, but we think we can hit the metrics of other strategic grade IMUs for conventional systems, and we have a pathway that we can improve their performance rather than optimizing on conventional technology. That's a much more manageable and realistic pitch that I'll be much more opening and welcoming to than trying to sell me off of just buzzwords that they may think ring like a resonator coming out of the Pentagon. So.
Well, and I'm going to pivot off that and say everyone should immediately write down Nick's name, because that's what you want in an investor. And I've been having the opposite where I'm going and saying, this is going to be big. It's going to happen between tomorrow and some tomorrow far in the future. And I can't guarantee you that. I can only guarantee you we'll be here, we'll be doing it. And that realistic approach, it's hard to find investors in deep tech that have what Nick just said. So that is definitely amazing to see, especially where you're coming from and where you work. But he's 100% right. We've got to have the dream and the vision. Doesn't mean you have to fall into the quantum bullshit and the mire of like buzzwords and the buzzword bingo, right? You can still say, look, quantum radar systems, and the example Nick gave, future looking, amazing. This is what it's going to do. By the way, here's a reasonable path to get there. And it's going to take, there's plenty of investors that have long-term vision, be it the government investors or investors in cultures like Japan, where, you ask a VC, they say, oh, where's your 30-year plan? And you're like, what? Sorry, I'm a startup. So, I think that's really important to point out though, Nick. That's wonderful to hear from you.
Worley, tell us one near-term application that you think, so you mentioned that StrangeWorks is primarily a software platform.
Yep.
What are you targeting as applications of that platform in the near term? So are there optimization problems? Are there materials simulation problems that you think are going to be valuable for the StrangeWorks platform?
So right now, we're of the belief that there's a lot of things that are happening that people just don't have exposure to and just haven't seen, right? So that leads you to say, well, I can't find any evidence of there being applicable problems, so there aren't any. And that's not necessarily true. Now, the thing you have to understand with these problems is it's not that classical computers will never solve the problems quantum computers could solve. That is not true. It's that the classical architecture would take 2 million years to do it, and we don't want to wait 2 million years, right? So this whole like one or the other, it's got to be this or that. Think of classical computing a little bit more like Reese's Pieces, right? You got your peanut butter and my chocolate. I got my chocolate and your peanut butter. The reason I say that is you're never going to get away from having a classical infrastructure integrated with the quantum infrastructure, and you shouldn't want to. Think about Shor's algorithm, right? 5 steps in that algorithm, okay? Pick a random number, a factor of co-primes. You go through all this. At the end of the day, I could write an iPhone app that could do pretty much all of that so blindingly fast. You just want that non-deterministic quantum magic in that 4-step, right, for that. And so you're going to be looking at these infrastructures being combined. So I believe because of that, there are a number of problems in chemistry, in drug discovery, and in material sciences that are applicable today. Now, the problem is we don't have a 1,000,000 qubit machine. We've got like 50 qubits here and 14 there and whatever. And remember, these qubits are all different. So how they affect a problem, how they can process a problem, they're different ways of doing this with physics. They'll get different results. They'll have different ups and downs and different pros and cons. But there are plenty of issues with material science. You want to go to Mars? There's probably some things we could definitely use a quantum computer for. You want to build better encryption? Absolutely. Post-quantum cryptography is something that's a problem that's important. Optimization for logistics is absolutely probably the first one where you see the most activity, be it companies like Volkswagen with their autonomous stuff, or the things UPS and FedEx have looked into with quantum. Obviously, optimization is big. A lot of people using annealers for that, but I think you'll see the ion traps and the gate models be used for that soon as well. For me, that's not the problem. Because if Nick and I found somebody to invest in that had a 2 million qubit machine with perfect fidelity today, I'm telling you, there would be nobody to program it. So right now, I'm not actually worried about those problems. I'm worried about the quantum workforce that will have any knowledge or way of addressing any of those problems with this technology. I'm also not worried about the things that people are worried about today and trying to solve, oh, we're trying to do this problem faster than a classical machine. I think that's a completely wrong approach, because there'll be a timeline, pre-quantum and post-quantum. And post-quantum, where we're at right now, and this is why I'm so excited about the space for all the entrepreneurs out there, we're in 1963. And a guy named Jack has just said, here's a microprocessor. Nobody sees the internet. Nobody sees autonomous vehicles. Nobody sees the iPhone. That's where the trillions of dollars in opportunity will be. And we won't have any visibility into that until quantum becomes real. So I think we should all be focused on we need those problems for enterprise, but it won't, we got to have all of this hit at the same time, right? It's like a precise military strike. If we have a ton of problems we can solve and nobody can do the programming to solve them, that's not gonna help us any more than having a bunch of people and not having the problem solved.
Okay, before I go to our final question, I would like to say that if you have a 2 million qubit system with perfect fidelity, call me. I will find you programmers for it.
Call any of us.
But we actually had a question from the audience that we wanted to address, and this is from Brian Cook. And I'll ask Nick to address this first, and then maybe before we end up, Worley can add any other observations to that. So the question is, do we need a quantum strategy for the joint force? And if so, who owns it?
The answer is yes, and the answer is there already exists one. So OSD R&E, so the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, that's a mouthful, effectively owns the quantum science kind of roadmap. And Dr. Paul Lapata is the shepherd or the principal quantum science director for OSD R&E. In fact, DIU is a sub-organization that feeds into OSD R&E. We're a DoD joint level agency. And so a lot of the actual prototypes, the prototypes I described earlier, kind of feeds into that particular roadmap, which includes more than just quantum sensors and IMUs, includes clocks, includes gravimeters, magnetometers, quantum computing. All of that kind of feeds and is under the shepherding of OSD R&E.
Okay. Worley, I'm not sure I left you anything to comment on there.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that it already exists. I mean, but that is not an area I should cover. That is 100% right. Area.
So since we're starting to run down now, Worley, maybe you can tell us your wish list for what types of companies you would like to coexist with in the ecosystem. For those of us planning to start cohorts and maybe try to incubate some other entries into the field.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. We already coexist with a lot of them. So on February 16th, we actually released our platform. And so we have over 21 partners, including everybody from Amazon and IBM to companies you never heard of, like Atom Computing and Bleximo and Entropic Labs all over the world. And we have communities in over 40 countries right now, all getting people. Some of these are enthusiasts, which are people brand new to the space. Some are software developers moving into space. Some are physics experts moving into the space. But you're looking at a pretty substantial global community. I'd like to get everybody to join that. We don't control that. There's almost no Strangeworks branding on quantumcomputing.com. It's literally what, like I said, I believe that without bringing everybody together at this very critical time right now, we'll just keep delaying the industry further and further. We keep making promises that, you make a promise to Nick, he gets you some funding, you don't come through on it. Guess what? You're going to understand when he doesn't give you funding more. Same thing with the VCs, same thing with everybody. So I think that collaborative environment is that. But if I had one wish, and this is horribly self-promoting, and I apologize, I'd like everybody interested in it to pick up a copy of Quantum Computing for Babies, which is now the #1 book in quantum computing, to the dismay of physicists everywhere, worldwide. But no, I mean, my thing would be, look, my wish list is this: collaboration. We have 21 companies we announced. We have 10 more we'll be announcing soon. We have another 30 we're talking to. If we just bring everybody together, the way I like to say it, and I'll leave it at this, is everybody's currently fighting over a piece of pie. because of the investment is driving that. And here's the fact. You guys are fighting over a piece of pie when we're standing in the kitchen and Nick has flour on his face and I've got berries on mine. There's a fire on the stove. The sprinklers are going off, but we're all going to own that piece of quantum pie. And it's like, that's just not where the industry is. We need a lot more collaboration. And frankly, I think we need a Manhattan project for quantum in the US.
Wonderful. Well, Worley, Nick, thank you so much. This was personally very interesting to me. And I imagine the audience found it just as interesting as I did. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And I think we are now waiting to hear from Patricia, who's going to.
There she is.
There she is.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Worley, Rick. Awesome fireside. I like hearing about the ideas to make it more collaborative and more funded. And I like the focus on metrics specifically related to the warfighter. We will get to a point where there's going to be an asymmetric advantage with quantum computing. So it's an exciting time to be part of it. So thank you.
Appreciate the time.
Next up is networking. Don't miss out on this opportunity to connect with the DoD innovation community. Just click networking on the left and hop in and jump in and be brave. See you back at 1:15 for our second panel. Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed the networking. Next up for our quantum panel, national security concerns with emerging technologies. I'd like to invite up our moderator, Mike Dietz, NDIA Lone Star Chapter President. Mike brings to the conversation experience in the defense industry, advanced math, physics, and electrical engineering expertise, and a long-standing strategic mindset in the area of national security and technology. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Patricia. Good afternoon. We're very fortunate to have three experts in quantum computing who understand the industry, national security, and how the implications of each play together. I'm very pleased to introduce Bob Sorensen, Chief Analyst for Quantum Computing on Hyperion Research, where he's currently the high-performance computing analyst covering advanced and emerging computing hardware, architectures, benchmarking, and performance analysis. Previously, he was a senior technology analyst supporting senior-level U.S. policymakers, including those in the White House, Department of Defense, and Commerce. Chris Larakis, advanced quantum devices scientist at IBM. Chris is a quantum computing ecosystem strategist with expertise in programming, high-energy physics, quantum information, superconducting technologies, and electronics design. Chris enjoys leading teams, building disruptive technologies with the potential for significant impact, and is passionate about undergraduate students getting access to quality advanced physics lab where the students can get hands-on experience in developing experiments and learning experimental techniques. Chris is also passionate about reinvigorating the manufacturing base in the U.S. Steve Reinhardt is the Vice President of Product Development at Quantum Computing Incorporated. Throughout a career at Cray Research, SGI, a startup called Yark Data, D-Wave, and now QCI, Steve has focused on maturing new high-performance computing technologies for production use and has created new computing analytic APIs for subject matter experts since 2003. As we begin, I wanted to read this excerpt from the Interim National Security Strategic Guidance released last week by the White House. Where it says the world's leading powers are racing to develop and deploy emerging technologies such as quantum computing that could shape everything from the economic and military balance among states to the future of work. Given that our panel is focused on national security concerns with quantum computing, can we ensure that the U.S. has a technological advantage while ensuring our economy and businesses are viable as the technology matures? I'll let the panelists decide who can take that first.
You're going to let us flip for it?
You have one of those quantum coins or something?
So, I mean, certainly, I think we would all agree that the U.S. is poised to make this happen. And the question is, what do we have to do to enable it to be able to, or to foster all the industries to move forward to create that ecosystem that's necessary to support. And you know, we should not, I know we're focused on quantum computing, but we should really focus on quantum information at large to make sure that the DoD gets all of the things that they need associated with that.
Yeah, I guess my thought would be, I don't know for sure that we can do that, ensure that the U.S. has a technological advantage, but to me, there are obviously things we can do that will make it more likely that we have an advantage, and we should do those things.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. There's no way to guarantee anything, but there are ways to make sure that government policy, you know, commercial desires and competitive aspects, as well as academic progress, all are merged and somehow coordinated in a fashion that leads towards an optimal outcome. I don't think that you can guarantee anything if you just let these three different elements that all can contribute to quantum information science go off on their own direction. There needs to be at least some degree of collaboration and coordination and cooperation between the sectors to optimize the potential output.
Okay. Well, just to kind of follow up on that, what are some of the key factors you think that are going to drive whether or not we can get an advantage?
Maybe I'll jump in. You know, to me, a lot of this is fairly simple and maybe not. I mean, my sister's always said I have a keen grasp for the obvious. And as a country, I think we have to ask for what we want. And I think what we want is quantum computers that are delivering compelling performance. And right now, we're not there yet. So we have to think about how we get there. Research is an indispensable part of getting there, but it's a way on the, it's a step on the way to delivering compelling quantum computers, not an endpoint. And so, to me, we should fund research, yes, but we should explicitly be favoring products when they appear. And there's one current bill in the Congress that only funds research. So if you had a product that was actually useful by the simple reading of the law, you wouldn't be able to buy it with that money. So it seems kind of crazy. We want production computers eventually, so let's ask for what we want.
Steve makes a great point here. I think we need to look at both sides of the equation here. There's a natural inclination for government policy and the investment community, in some cases, to think about the push. What is the technology that we need to develop and how can we get there? And in some cases, we ignore the pull concept. How can we create a receptive commercial sector, a receptive military, national security infrastructure to make use of what's being produced? And we can't rely entirely on the commercial providers to understand exactly how they can commit to a product development and then make sure that it has applications. We need to be thinking about the ultimate end users of quantum computing to make sure they have a seat at the table. They understand the risks, they understand the challenges, they understand the opportunities, and they can contribute to the policy-making discussion as well to ensure that everyone has a sense of where the supply is coming from and ultimately the value of its end use. You just can't have if you build it, he will come mentality in a technology that right now is so speculative, so risky, and doesn't have the kind of roadmap that the IT community is used to dealing with.
Well, there's a couple interesting challenges with this. One is you want to get cost components, and Bob, you brought up a really good point about incorporating the commercial sector. But there's challenges associated with that. Chris, do you have any follow-on thoughts about how we might go about this?
Well, I think that we're in violent agreement, which is unfortunate. It would be nice to have some objections here.
Okay, we'll get there.
Yeah, we will get there. Let me just riff off of what was just previously said. So there's an aspect, and you said it in kind of your introduction of this, where we need to, and I don't know if this is the government, but the government can play a big hand in this to be able to create the correct ecosystem, and that's it's a combination of both the software and the hardware ecosystem that's robust enough to take us where we are today. And I agree with what's been said before. We're kind of in this still very nascent field. There is no killer app yet. There's nothing that's developing the pull. There's a promise of pull. And I think that what we want to do is make sure that when we get to that point where the pull actually exists, or we should actively engage with the Department of Defense to find out what applications they think are most important, and then how we might provide the appropriate enabling technologies to make that a reality, and then help, as you say, Bob mentioned the roadmap. There's got to be a roadmap that's developed in that, and then also a tolerance for, well, it's not a straight line. We're going to get there through a whole variety of, well, that was a bad idea.
Okay, well, that sort of leads me to the next question, which are, and by the way, as we're going, audience members, please feel free to submit questions. I know there's going to be quite a bit of conversation here today. But I wanted to ask, what are some of the lessons we've learned from classical computing and other technologies that have gone through the technology life cycle, as we're very early on with this technology?
I'll jump in here initially, and the thing I'll point out is, in the IT sector in the early days, it was definitely a government-funded, military-centric kind of research agenda, and a lot of the technology that ultimately became commercially successful had its genesis in military research or national security infrastructure. I don't see that being the case in quantum. I think here we're looking more of an environment where national defense is a critical end user, but I don't see it as the significant driver of the technology. In fact, I don't even know if government is a significant driver of the technology. I think from a policy planning perspective, there needs to be an understanding that the commercial sector, in some sense, will be a significant technology driver and one of the more significant end users in the near term. And so the national security agenda needs to understand that they are no longer the dog or the tail. I don't know which aspect of who wags who in this particular example, but it's not like we saw in the early days where the government had the ultimate say in technology development because they were the significant and most wealthy consumer. That's not going to be the case in quantum. So it's going to require a different set of enticements and inducements by the government to make sure that their national security requirements are met, writ large, a much more commercially attractive, client base out in the customer world.
So I want to really emphasize what Bob just said, because I think that's really very important, and is that it is very different today. I'm obviously going to speak from a very IBM-centric point of view, but the drive really is coming more from the commercial sector. And so, God, for the last 20 years, the DoD has been relying more and more on commercial off-the-shelf type of solutions. So let's kind of work with that. Let's create that, and then create the specialty machines that are required for the Department of Defense or other consumers. That's going to be a much bigger winning factor when you think about it, because then you're going to have a much better lifetime in terms in a development cycle for keeping the DoD up to date.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with what was just said by both Bob and Chris. I would maybe add a particular slant to it. I've had experience. There are parts of the U.S. government that have been very effective, in my view, working with specific vendors to add specific capabilities to existing commercial products, as Bob and Chris were saying, that would that those particular agencies know how to take advantage of. An example of that I think of is in the DEC Alpha processor, which is at one point, the fastest microprocessor you could buy. The U.S. government funded inclusion of the pop count instructions, which was really useful for particular types of processing. It was available to everybody. It went into the standard product. Not everybody really looked at it or knew how to use it. So I think, to me, that can be very, very useful. And I guess I would kind of couple that with, I think the way the U.S. government is going to be able to gain the benefit from quantum computers the way we want and need, is by understanding those quantum computers at least as well as anybody else. And in my opinion is that, as everyone has said, these machines are very new. The knowledge is incomplete. It'll be really important that people from the particular agencies will have not only intellectual understanding, but visceral understanding of what the systems do and what they don't and how to use them effectively. And it is almost impossible to overstate how much you learn by using early systems, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, understanding how you can possibly get past the weaknesses. And that is a really rich conversation you can have, but it's strongly dependent on the level of understanding of the end users.
Mm-hmm.
I
was just gonna say, Mike, one other thing I'd add, and it's more holistic, but I think something we need to keep in mind is, U.S. policy and the way that the commercial sector has conducted itself, and end users, and even some of our government rules and regulations have been premised that the IT sector the United States has functionally held an unassailable lead. in both technology development and legacy capabilities. And that gave us, the United States, an awful lot of free ride activities. And you could think about something as simple as export controls in that field. Quantum is a clean slate. There's no clear leader now. There is no legacy boost. There's nothing that really comes from IT capability that translates directly into quantum capability. And we've seen that and I always say, certain countries punching above their weight in quantum as opposed to their capabilities in traditional IT. In a place like, say, Canada or Australia would be great examples. So what we have to keep in mind here, and anytime we talk about any kind of policy or activities within the sector, is that this is a global phenomena where we are not the unassailable leaders. Our supremacy is not assured. And I always like to say, we have to be cautious because it's not like the old days where if the U.S. government didn't fund it, it didn't get done. Now we can say if the U.S. government doesn't fund it, somebody else is probably going to do it anyway. And so we need to look at this from a much more global context. And what happens if we isolate ourselves from the rest of the world, some of the problems there, versus the need to think about national security from a global perspective. How can we navigate this when we're not the unassailable leaders in this technology?
But we should also, I think that's a really good point. We should think about how do we take advantage of that global interest? How do you bring these people in and make them your allies rather than your adversaries? Now, there's always going to be clear adversaries, but we really have to take advantage of that because you're right that we do not have the unassailable lead, as you say.
I was just when I did some dabbling in the export control area a while back, and the question always became in terms of, okay, what do we gain by denying technology or denying capability, making it difficult for foreign nationals to work on government-funded research programs and such. But no one ever did the analysis about what do we lose by enacting those policies. And I think at a minimum, and the stakes are going to be much higher in the quantum realm, where if we follow the same old kind of policies driven by the national security agenda, we have to at least start to try to quantify what the impact is on the downside, as well as the protection aspect that comes into it. So I think that's just a gentle reminder here about how we need to transform some of the old thinking with respect to how quantum presents new challenges.
Let me build on that for a minute, Bob, because I think that's a really important point also. So let's, there are examples throughout history where controls were placed on them. And then the only end user or the end buyer would be the military. And then it becomes economically unfeasible for U.S. companies to actually manufacture what is needed because they don't have a global market. So it's going to be a very delicate balance where we play this game. And I'm with you that we should not, kind of shut this down.
Very good.
So Mike, coming back to your question about lessons from classical computing. Actually, so full disclosure, I work for a quantum software company. So you might think that I have opinions that are perhaps self-serving. But with that said, to me, there's a pair of lessons that we need to both remember and forget, and namely about how we develop high-value software. In the bad old days of computing, each computer vendor had its own stack, top to bottom, instruction set, sometimes even type of memory, bit, word size, etc., operating system, compilers, languages, database system, etc. And people know, it's well known that they used that to lock in users, customers. That was a bad thing. And then users kind of gained control, and over time, Unix was a part of that. That was a common operating system, still not open source, but then we actually moved beyond that to open source. And now, for many parts, especially civilian parts of the U.S. government, if they essentially don't want to pay for software, period. And so if you have value-added software, it's like you don't exist to them. And to me, that pendulum has swung too far. And yes, we absolutely need to make sure that software is done in a way that allows me as a user to move my program from one platform to another. In this case, maybe one quantum processor to another quantum processor. But to say that we know that all innovation will happen in open source means that if anybody at a company has a greater idea, they can't really monetize that. That's, to a first order, that's not what we believe in a capitalist society. And the second thing it means is that to the extent we have innovations, we open source them so everybody gets them, even our adversaries. So to me, there's some, we swung too far, we need to swing back a little bit. Exactly what does that look like? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've in a couple of former lives, talking with U.S. government people who believe strongly in open source, I use the argument that, okay, well, maybe we should think about software having a half-life, a decay rate, the value of software having a decay rate. And so maybe a government could buy software, but would say, your value is decaying. And so we're going to ask you to think about how are you going to put 40% of this into open source in the next 2 years, or whatever the fraction is. I'm waving my hands a little bit here. You see that, but there have to be, in my opinion, there are other models we might want to try.
That's a really good follow up there, and I want to make sure we get to our next question because I think it has a lot of really good points. So, what in your experience have you learned about developing the workforce that will be needed to tackle the complex challenges we'll be facing?
I'll jump in. I have been very optimistic about workforce development in the QC sector, simply because, Mike pointed out the stack is coalescing much faster than I anticipated. The idea that you don't have to be a PhD physicist to write code for a quantum computer nowadays. You can, there's application programmer interfaces, there are software development tools. It's interesting, if you look at the career tab on a lot of software companies in quantum and see the kind of people they're interested in, they're looking for folks with software development capabilities, with DevOps kinds of stuff. It's not that they're looking for quantum computing folks. And my example that I always use is, I would never ask a Python programmer how a metal oxide semiconductor gate works. So why would I assume that I need a quantum physicist to write good code? And so really what's happening is, because of the abstraction within the abstraction implementation stack, you could be a software developer and not know about quantum. You could probably start to think about compiler writing and not have to know too much about what's above you or below you in the stack. And so to me, that does a great gift in terms of mitigating the requirements for workforce development. And the other thing, of course, is, and Steve, I always say you're a stellar example. You're a quantum guy right now. You weren't a quantum guy a decade ago. There are a whole bunch of people out there, smart people, who have programming skills and insights that they can bring as a toolkit to a new sector and hit the ground running. So we shouldn't just concentrate on workforce development in terms of graduates coming out of school. We should think about retraining and basically the itinerant programmer, the itinerant software engineer, the folks who can bring their skill set to a new technology and use it in a new and interesting way. So I'm much more optimistic about the workforce development issue than I was perhaps even, say, 3 years ago.
So I want to make sure that we don't leave out, because you guys are being very software centric, and I'm a dyed-in-the-wool hardware guy. That there, look, exactly. I think part of that is that we have to make sure that people understand that, to your point, you do not need to be a quantum physicist to contribute to making a quantum hardware portion of a quantum computer. You need to learn what I'd call an armchair knowledge of what quantum computing is. And there is a need for mechanical engineers and electrical engineers. I think that, if you were in Zyra's talk when she was doing the fireside with Mike Hayduk, she talked about that, and I think also Mike brought this up, that the classical computers will never be displaced. There's always going to be classical computers that are going to be the front end to these quantum computers. And one of the bigger problems, and this is not just a software problem, but it's a hardware problem, how do you make the two of those work seamlessly together? How do you change that workload? How do you make it, to Bob's point, you've got to make it totally transparent so that this is now available to every person. You're not have specialized training to build out that appropriate workforce.
IBM has a computer just like that on the cloud that's accessible today. Isn't that right?
Yes.
All right. Well, that's excellent. We do have time to take one question from the audience. And by the way, those were great answers. And I think you basically answered the question: how hard is it to get the workforce plugged into the space? Not very hard, as it requires a broad set of skills. The question I have is from Rebecca Sexton, and she's asking, what methods and approaches are you using to represent the end user in the process? So the people that are going to use these quantum computers.
So maybe I'll jump in. So, and just to be clear, we have a quantum ready software product in the market today. You can solve problems classically. You can also solve problems using a quantum processor directly. And so we have some members of our team who are application developers, not system software developers or tool developers or compiler developers. So they are, we refer to one of them as user zero. And we also have end users that are physicists. We call them subject matter experts, or SMEs. They're, protein designers or logistics people or schedulers or whatever their expertise is. And they use our software and they say, boy, I'm trying to do this and I just can't find a way to do it. What are you guys thinking? Or, oh, that's how you use that. Okay, I need that. Good. Thanks for telling me that. And we get feedback, and we're trying to meet them where they are, using concepts that they already know and understand. But to me, that's you just have to get that immediate feedback absolutely as early in the life cycle as you can.
I'll be very quick. The beauty of quantum is that the barriers to entry are so low for anyone within the corporate world. The old days, if you wanted to dip your toe in HPC, you were writing a $25 million check to Cray. You had to replumb the basement with water and all. Expensive staff. Nowadays, you go on the cloud access model. Any corporation that wants to commit a couple of smart grad students to dipping their toe in the water can do it. It's a matter of widespread availability and low barriers to entry. And Chris, I'm gonna throw it to you and say, talk about all the partnerships that IBM has with end users.
That's what I really wanted to bring up, because I think this is a really key thing. There's huge number of partnerships. I probably can't say a dollar figure, but we're talking more than 100 partnerships with various companies at this point. But if I want to focus on like DoD specific, one of the things, and this is part of one of my assigned missions by my boss, is to reach out to DoD entities. Now that's DoD contractors and the DoD proper, and work with them. We're not the domain experts. We're not the subject matter experts, as you pointed out, Steve, in the Department of Defense actual application. But what this group here, can do is provide the ability to enable that, the enabling technology, the enabling software. We have the understanding, and we can work with them and say, wait a minute, to your point, if you think about your problem slightly differently, you can implement it on this fabric and you will get quantum advantage. And that's something that, we're not there yet, I don't think. We need to get like a consortium or something like that, where more people come to the table and we talk about the end user problems. And then we, as our, this group that we've gathered here, that Mike, you've gathered, come up with the enabling technology, the enabling software that makes it easy, keeps the barrier to entry very low.
Okay. Very good. Well, I think we're down to less than a minute here, so I'm going to go ahead and just say, I noticed that there were some questions that we didn't get to. If you'd like to continue the conversation, the NDIA Lone Star chapter is happy to facilitate a working group where we can work through the national office, who I'm sure will be doing this quickly through their Emerging Technologies Institute. And as we wrap up, I want to thank the panel team, including Patricia, and also the Capital Factory for hosting Pitchbook. Yeah. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for including us.
Thank you, Mike, Bob, Chris, and Steve. I've been really looking forward to the next session, the Startup Showcase. To moderate, I'd like to invite up Capital Factory's Adam Valenta and IBM's Brian Cook.
Hey there, everybody. It's great to see y'all. For this session, we get to introduce 4 quantum startups that get to show us a little bit of what's going on in the quantum space. I want to introduce Brian. He works with AFC and Forcecom with IBM. And Brian, would you like to introduce the first startup?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get this started. Looks like we just came off a couple of minutes, went over on that last one. So let's get started. Let me give a warm welcome to Jonathan Josephson, the founder and CTO of Quantum Interface. So the mic is yours, Jonathan. Let's get started.
All right. Hello, and thank you for this opportunity. And we approach quantum on a different side, on QC, quantum computing. The user interface to all this data has to change, and that's what we specialize in. Not only how are we going to handle all the information today, but how are we going to handle the information of tomorrow with quantum computing, and how much is going to affect us. So I'm going to show this. And okay, so what we do is we take this complicated amount of data, and the quantum computing actually adds to this data, and we make this simpler to be able to interact with that data, see that data, and understand that data. We built an entirely new UI. We won the Gartner Award for Best HDMI, HMI, and we use it right now with the DoD, with the Air Force, with multiple units. We also work in the biopharma world, and we work in the XR world, and we're considered leaders in those, and we build these flagship products for companies. The user interface technology is quite limited, but Gartner Group said that this will be, they believe, the interface for the next 50 or 75 years. So let me tell you a little bit about it. What we have to do is, with a new interface, we need to be able to make it work the way that the brain does. It needs to be analog versus binary. So let's think about this as a field. And in that field, there's a lot of information. That's what the quantum computing, the database world, that's what all this information is. Internet of Things, the military Internet of Things. It's a lot of information. It comes in the form of multi-layered layers, lists, and nodes of data. That geometry in the environment that we put things in. And now it's spatially in 3D through VR and XR. What we do is we analyze the user's motion of their eyes, their body, the mouse, any input device across any sensor that can sense that interactive motion. And then we create this vector-based approach where we dynamically are interacting with the objects. And you can see from this, the objects interact with us. The beauty of it is we're seeing multiple layers at once, not a single click, 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 click. And we're able to see it in context. This allows us to understand a lot of information and to retain it better. We take this input, we make these objects smart, and these are intelligent now, and we put them inside a form factor, and we push these out as interactive points or nodes, and interactive layers, and interactive lists. And these are all dynamic. For instance, in this list, we don't see one thing and then a drop down, so it's file, folder, document. We get to see the file, the folder, and the document all at once. In this case, this is for the New York Metro Transit Authority, where we take huge amounts of data and we allow users to access their data in less than 2 seconds, rather than the average of over 30 seconds to a minute and a half to get to the same thing repetitively over and over again. So we want to reshape the way that we see data and interact with it to make it smart. We have global patents. We have over 50, and then we also have products that we built for the DoD. It's a current program called QIVX. It's where we take 360 videos and we put a digital layer on top of it. Instructors can add information and create lessons out of 360 videos, flat videos, almost any file format, and they can do it in minutes. Typically, a lesson takes 10 to 15 minutes, where instead of taking Premiere or another program that takes hours to be able to use. We work with the XR platforms for biopharma companies, and we provide both the DoD and the biopharma as SaaS products. And then we also have our SDK that on a limited basis, we partner with companies to be able to bring this new kind of interaction and this new kind of methodology and embedded inside of their systems. For the Air Force in particular, we're currently used by the 355th and by the 149th, the 535th, PTN, and several other ones. Looks like the Thunderbirds will join on, and we're working to build out this system. This was a phase 2 that turned into a commercial product. As soon as we finished the phase 2, it became licensed, and we're building out those right now. That's the plan. And everything that says currently is sort of how we've exploded on our growth with the U.S. Air Force. Now with Aloha Spark and with the 19th with others, we're wanting to take this Air Force wide. That's what actually they would like to do. And we are working with, we're talking with others in terms of the ABMS and JADC2 and the data visualization aspects. As a company, this is real quick, shows what we went for from May through September last year with the phase 2, and then how the projects are ramping up. These are some companies that we typically work with, and this is our team. This is our core team. We ramp up to about 35 people when we need to, using partner networks and contractors. And this is what some of our customers say about us. And we understand the XR world and the hardware that goes with it. And we want to be able to bring that and make it ready for the explosion of data and the speed that's going to be available. Of course, the pipeline up and down of the speed is important through the hardware, as we have cloud-based systems. But on localized systems, we want to take advantage of that speed at speeds that the brain can handle at the speed of decision making. And that's what this interface gives. And thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that pitch, Jonathan. Very good. So my first question is kind of a layman's question, because I'm not very involved in quantum computing, so I want to understand this better. So does QI actually use quantum computing, and how is that applied?
We do not. Our system is not based on the kind of processing power that is being used behind the scenes. We're that front layer, that gateway between the human and the system and the hardware and the data. So the way that we interact with technology and the data is what we're changing. The beautiful part is that as eye tracking systems come to speed, we understand what you're thinking and what your intent is, and we can cause the system to respond to that intent. Well, that system through quantum computing is going to be able to respond a lot more accurately and with a lot more contextual data to compare and contrast the real thing I want, so I understand it in the whole ball.
I see. Thank you so much. So I have a question from the audience. Anton Vedeshin, I hope I pronounced that correctly. He's a PhD and he has a question. I read before that quantum computing is missing error controls big time, and potentially 1,000 physical qubits needed to make a stable 1 virtual qubit. So we are still too far away from stable calculations. Now, that's not really a question, but it was posted here in the chat. Here we go. Brian, I'm gonna let you go ahead and ask one of your questions that you actually posted in the chat that you had for Jonathan.
Yeah, Jonathan, so I'm involved with Army Futures Command. So I'm wondering if you've talked to the situational training environment cross-functional team. So they're trying to build the AR/VR future of the Army. If you've talked to any of those guys, I'm sure the network cross-functional team would love to see the visualization of data at speed. They're having a huge problem with project convergence in this space right now.
I would love to. we have not yet. We actually started through the AppWorks program, and it's been now a race to stay up with the things that are wanted. And I just had a conversation with Tim a couple weeks ago, which is the very first conversation inside of the AAL or the AFC. We have not. We'd love to go in there. We just haven't been in there yet.
All right, wonderful. I think we're going to have to move on to our next startup. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time and thank you for your pitch. So next up, we have Pranav Gokhale. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He's the co-founder and CEO of SuperTech. So Pranav, how about you go ahead and take it away?
Great. Thanks so much for having me here. And just as a sanity check, can you see my screen share?
Yep, now I can. Perfect.
Awesome. And let me reset my timer. So I'm Pranav. I'm the co-founder and CEO of SuperTech, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today. Let me just tell you a little bit about our background. So we're a spin out of quantum computing research from the University of Chicago, and we're actually directly embedded in federal research through our incubation by this CRI program. It's Argonne's incubator program, so that's kind of cool for this audience. And we're also funded by $500K in venture investment from these three investors, George Schultz, Mary Tolan, Third Stream. And we've also been awarded multiple non-dilutive grants from the DOE and from the Air Force. So let me tell you about what we're building. Basically, we were founded on the observation that the traditional computing stack for classical computing is not a good fit for quantum computing. And the reason for that is that if you look at the stacks today for quantum computers that have been proposed, this is actually from an award-winning paper, it just looks like a traditional stack, except they sprinkled some Qs through it. And that's kind of appealing. It's very familiar. But the catch is that it leads to the separation of the computer science at the top and the physics at the bottom. That is the applications that you'd care about and the hardware that quantum companies are building today. And every time you go through one of these steps, there's a 5x efficiency loss, and in total, there's a 100x efficiency loss that we're trying to bridge. And in particular, we're bridging this gap from the physics and the computer science using something called cross-layer optimization. And this is this idea that we can take code that addresses some end-user application at the top of the stack and directly shortcut it and compile it down to the quantum chip at the bottom of the stack and generate these analog pulses that the customer never has to deal with, but we can really optimize. And this is one of our examples of our key enabling technologies. This one happens to be patented, so we have IP defensibility here. So at the end of the day, what we're building is software that aims to get 5 years worth of hardware progress, but virtually through software. It's sort of like using our software today would be like using a quantum computer from 2026, except you get it virtually today. And these are some of our publications that make steps towards these 5 years of progress. 2 of them are actually patented. And because we have this ability to accelerate the use of quantum hardware, we really have 2 target customers in mind. The first is hardware companies, such as IBM, who kindly invited us. They're a partner of us, and they invited us to this event. And our value proposition to hardware companies is that we can help them build a better quantum computer than their competitors can. And on the application side, we're targeting companies in defense, energy, and finance that aim to realize quantum speedups sooner than otherwise possible, accelerating that timeline by 5 years. And now, given the audience here today, I was just going to spell out some of our vision for quantum opportunities in defense. So if we look at the whole stack for where a quantum computer handles an end user application, it starts with some application. Let's take, for example, aircraft identification based on radar signature and flight maneuvers. Here we would be interested in anomaly detection for national security reasons, for as one example. And so how do we get this to a quantum chip? In short, we convert this to a quantum algorithm, we compile that quantum algorithm into code, and then we turn the code into pulses, and then the pulses run on the hardware. And our expertise is at these 4 stages on the right hand of the stack, beginning with this entry point. And just to point out one particular area, this first step of converting to a quantum algorithm, we've devised this technique with MIT and Princeton called core set clustering. that enables a very large data set, like aircraft photos, to be compiled down to a very small quantum computer, which is appealing given current experimental constraints. And so that's where we are. This work was actually recommended, in fact, has been funded for follow-on funding by the Air Force. So at the end of the day, what we enable customers to do is get a fully optimized quantum pipeline, and they can bring in any applications they want to. So a little bit about our team, relevant to this audience and the industry we're in. We are all US citizens, which is helpful for working with defense, for one example. And I graduated from the University of Chicago with my PhD in quantum computing last year, where I met my co-founder and actually my PhD advisor, Fred Chung. Fred is actually the director of the NSF's largest investment ever into quantum computer science. This is a project called EPIC. And that's the project that we've actually been able to recruit our team from, which has been great. So just to wrap things up, we have this interdisciplinary expertise and intellectual property that will enable us to close the gap from quantum computers to practical applications. We have value to both hardware companies like our partner IBM and to energy and finance defense companies. Stay tuned for a big announcement coming up soon. And we have an experienced team that has a resource advantage through our incubation in the government research, as well as a recruiting advantage through EPIC. So I'll take 2 minutes for questions. And in addition, if you'd like to get in contact with me, feel free to email me at pranav@super.tech. We're very eager to partner with customers and run pilots for your technology. And I'm happy to take questions.
Hey, Pranav, awesome pitch. Appreciate the timing of it and the crispness of it. So the first question comes out is how well does how do you scale the software to larger devices and larger challenges? So, you take that one of aircraft, let's just say, do all things that are threats to the DoD. So.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it does seem like a very challenging problem. The saving grace is that there's this sort of new research on something called a QUBO, a quadratic unconstrained binary optimization. We don't really care what that is, let's say, for this pitch, but basically it's this language that enables any problem that we would care about, like aircraft identification or planning the scheduling of nurses in a hospital. And all those problems can be described as QUBO. And in fact, this is one of our specialties. And once you have it in this QUBO format, a quantum computer is a really good machine for solving that kind of problem. So in short, all these problems that are optimization or machine learning problems can, in one way or another, be described in a format that runs on a near-term quantum device.
Awesome. So, all right. So you showed like 5 or 6 entry points where your team can enter into. Which one of those is the toughest for your team? And I know it depends, but on average.
That's a good question. I'd say it's given the earliness of quantum computing today, there has not yet been a convincing demonstration of practical quantum advantages, though we think it's just on the cusp of it. We have unpractical quantum advantages so far, so it's not too far away. So I think it's really that left side of the stack, the applications, in the sense that it's hard to show the potential of quantum until we really see the financial gains, but we really think that's going to happen in 2 years from now.
Awesome. Thanks again for your pitch and for the questions. Adam, I think we're right on time for the next introduction.
Yeah, we are, and I can introduce him if you'd like. Yeah. So for our third startup, we have Jim Ricotta. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing everyone's name correctly. He's the CEO and chairman of Aliru Quantum Technologies. So super excited to have y'all. Would love to get you up here on stage. Jim, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Close enough.
Okay, perfect.
But the company is Aliro.
Aliro.
And I'm sharing my screen. Okay, thank you.
Take it away.
This is Aliro, and we are building the first great networking company of the quantum era. There's a huge opportunity here. The quantum internet is coming. You've seen the announcements from the US DOE last summer, from China, from the European Union. So it's a strategic imperative for the major countries to build quantum communication systems, and there's billions of dollars that are being spent on this. We're the first mover. We are a pure play quantum networking company. We're the only one that I know about, And our founder and CTO is one of the leading lights in quantum networking, one of the world's experts. Her name is Professor Preena Rang of Harvard and Caltech. There's already a near-term use case for the quantum internet. It's not a build it and hope they come type of thing. And that is unhackable, secure communication. Sometimes we call it physics-based security because you're using quantum entanglement itself to make sure there's no eavesdropping or man-in-the-middle attack. You can think of this like a quantum virtual private network, if you will. And we are involved in active projects with different parts of the DoD, of the DOE, and different contractors and telecom companies who are trying to build these unhackable quantum networks. This works on fiber in the ground as well as working in space, which is a big interest when you think about things like quantum sensor networks that are being developed. There's massive long-term potential here. This is one of those big bang moments in computing. And if you're a company like Aliro, that's one of the first companies in quantum networking, you get a chance to set standards. And our goal is to become the Cisco or Juniper of quantum networking. Why is this happening now? Well, there's already been a lot of investment in quantum computing, hundreds of millions of dollars, and the big tech companies have already jumped in. You know the names, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, et cetera. In some ways, if you're an early stage investor, quantum computing has left the gates. Quantum networking is the next big space race, if you will, with lots of money pouring into it, lots of chance for non-dilutive funding. Commercially, the service providers know that this is the wave of the future. What are we building? We're building a software platform. You can think of it like a software-defined network, a stack that will involve the control plane for quantum networks, as well as our first product is a simulator and emulator, because the first step in building a quantum network is trying to figure out which repeater do you want to use, which quantum memory, which routing protocol, which entanglement distillation protocol. Distributing entanglement, high-quality entangled photons is the core service of the quantum network, and that's what we're focused on. We've got quite a bit of traction. We got our seed funding from VCs in 2019. We won 2 contracts with the Air Force last year. We are part of the big NSF Center for Quantum Networks that's based at the University of Arizona. We are also participants in the IETF working group on quantum networks, and that's where a lot of standards activity is going to go on. We have an early pipeline with some of these test beds that you have heard about that the DOE has at their labs in different parts of the US. We're talking to the DIU about some of their projects involving secure networks, and of course the Air Force. We are the only company that has a world-class quantum networking team already. We've got Professor Narang as our CTO. She knows who all the people are in this field, and there's only a handful, so we have a chance to aggregate talent. I have experience leading startups, networking companies, and selling them to the big players. We're the first in the market. We've got to focus on that near-term use case of the highly secure quantum network, and then we'll build from there. And we've got a good roadmap that lets us first ship the SaaS offering for simulation and emulation, and then follow up with the control plane for entanglement as a service. We are hardware independent. I think that's pretty clear, but I'll make that point again. So quantum networking is a huge opportunity for many decades ahead. It's starting now. There are use cases that can be deployed this year and next year, and there's projects that we're engaged on, the idea of the unhackable network. There's a lot of non-dilutive funding, which is good for investors. We're the first to market, and we have a great team, a world-class team for this space. So that is Aliro, the first great quantum networking company.
Oh, thanks for that, Jim. That's awesome presentation, and thanks for rapidly getting through it. On the upfront, my question would be, are you getting cards and letters from Cybercom, NSA, R-Cyber, and those great organizations?
We're engaged with AFRL. Are you speaking of Cybercom from the Air Force?
Well, so there's an Air Force cyber, right?
Yeah.
But then there's the higher Nakasone Cybercom that runs, in parallel with the NSA.
I see. We haven't had direct contact yet, but that would be I think they'd be very interested to hear what we're doing.
No, back over to you, Adam. I think that'd be very interesting.
Awesome. Jim, I think that that's really all the questions we got. But thank you so much for your time. I absolutely love the pitch. And have a great rest of your day.
All right, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So I'm going to intro the last but certainly not least startup, we have Kevin Kane, co-founder and CEO of Ambit Incorporated. So Kevin, come on up on stage. Hey there, Kevin. How's your day going? You're muted right now.
Great. How is everyone?
Oh, we're doing great.
Okay.
Awesome. Go for it.
All right. Absolutely. So consistent with some of the innovations that were just presented here today, we look at quantum computing being used for decryption on an accelerated timeline. So not at the end of the decade, but by the middle, when those may be rolling out through some best effort hybrid approaches that are classical mixed with quantum, sharing some of the processes. The thing is, the bottom line is that innovation in software for quantum computing is exponential or double exponential, and hardware might be steep linear. This means that those who wish to use quantum computing for bad things, like dumping New York Times Stock Exchange data on the internet every day, consistently until the exchange halts indefinitely, is upon us this decade in the area of non-kinetic warfare. We believe the future of warfare is not F-35 fighters. It's largely non-kinetic. What is the purpose of bombing capitals when you can make them destitute and poor by dumping all their private data on the internet every day? Imagine if the Equifax hack happened every week instead of just once. And quantum computing, until we have a solution to defend against that, exposes us to massive downside or a halt to all financial institutions for our civilization. So that makes the post-quantum research extremely important. And there are only theoreticals and no red teaming yet for post-quantum encryption. So there is a NIST final phase candidates for post-quantum encrypted stream ciphers for post-quantum security. And we believe we have selected what will be the final down selects after being reviewing the internal discussions with the cryptographers and following them every day. So as a result of that mission, we are deployed and announcing a post-quantum version for what's just a consumer VPN that we're going to pivot to business and enterprise. At the same time, we are working on a partnership with a quantum algorithm developer that's pretty well known, so that we make sure that we understand as a technical expert the risk to quantum computing and defending against all the future possible attacks that are possible against our networks as a result of their unique capability. It's really important from our perspective to explain to our customer that there is a type of problem that quantum computers can solve that classical computers cannot, but it doesn't mean that all problems that quantum computers can solve, with classical computers, you can develop encryption that is supposed to be resistant against the unique type of problems quantum computers can solve. There's a very technical space, and sometimes we go a little bit too deep, but we want people to understand that there's a lot of snake oil in this space, and then there are people that are very specific in trying to understand this really complicated problem that is somewhere in a mix between cryptography, physics, computer science, and networking. And so we put a very genuine effort of being subject matter experts in this, because like as we said, what's at risk is civilization. What is at risk is all financial institutions. It's our view that RSA at all levels to their limit eventually will be broken. And 124 will be broken sooner than later. So this is extremely important for us as a company. We recently engaged some people at DIU and as well as NPS, the Naval Postgraduate School, and a number of other parties, and we are preparing some red teaming with our current solution with the best of capabilities that exist today. And as quantum computing continues to advance, we'll continue to red team. If we learn that there is a flaw in our implementation, or if we learn that we should choose a different cipher, then we will adjust. Our ultimate mission of the company is just to make sure that our financial institutions, space, also in the warfighter, that we are resistant to bulk decryption and systematic. And I can talk for hours and hours upon that because it is our daily trench work. But we have currently 1,200 customers on a soft launch with a consumer VPN built on a more modern protocol. Those consumer users on our soft launch are around the world. We are a post-revenue company. We raised and completed $1 million seed round. We have some really well-known investors in our fold. We are looking to raise $3 million at a new market cap as we look to expand our consumer line and grow our user base, and then move into business and enterprise and build out those capabilities from insider threat detection to Okta integration and so on. Our point of view is that within 5 years, we can have this landslide profit opportunity when the first quantum attacks start occurring and people are not sure how in the world is it that their data is dumped on the internet every day, but they can't find any holes in their system. And when that day comes, if we're positioned with the right technology and some traction, we could pick up 100 enterprise customers in a year as the people that spent the last 5 years knowing what we're talking about in that space. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. Like an existential threat to end the startup showcase. Thanks very much for that, Kevin. So the third-year veteran, I'm absolutely passionate about what you're talking about. So one of the big things most people maybe don't know is #1 national security objective for our country, protect the homeland. And so this is directly in line with what our presidents and our national security strategy use. So I'll ask you an odd question on that. So how do you attract team and talent for what you're doing? And it's kind of a forward-thinking space. How's that working? And do you have any tricks of the trade?
Sure, absolutely. I think young people want to work on this kind of stuff. So I recently gave a talk at the University of San Diego. I understand that they have partnered with some people. And so when I spoke to the class, I said simply, you have two choices with your life. Someone said, this is real talk. Do you want to go in the middle of the road and be relevant, do something? Or do you want to work on solving a problem 10 years later and be in the tail of the distribution? High risk, high reward, exciting? Or do you want to be safe and secure? You have to decide now who you are. And of course, a whole bunch of people reached out to me. So just by being very honest about that, this is not for people looking for a stable life. This is for people looking for a fight. And there's a lot of people like that. You'd be surprised.
Oh, no. I have a top secret clearance, so there's a couple of times I've bumped into that already, and it doesn't sleep well at night. So another question from the crowd, from actually Jorge Manresa there at the Capital Factory. Have you been in discussions with DIU? I think you mentioned DIU about the fragility.
I was just there.
This network.
Yeah. I was there 10 days ago on site, and I just finished drafting them an email right now. So I'm just getting in the door, just making the right connections, and at the same time, just recently tied up with some people at NPS, and we can talk offline about that and that progress. So there's a lot under the hood, and so some would be obviously on the fence and stuff, but a lot of work ahead of us. We are also in the area of, so we're in Trident Spectre. And so that's for obfuscated communications and contested congested networks. We have also a very different expertise. So we actually started this company 2 years ago, building, we wanted to build a decentralized chat application that obfuscated its routes and stuff like that. And we wanted to be able to have people communicate in authoritarian networks and be immune to DDoS attacks. So like a Telegram that couldn't be shut down. And so we actually started building that, and we tested it desktops, and we started heading that way. And people would ask us, why are you doing that? And, well, we want to liberate authoritarian regimes, and we want to make it so that, there is no defense. And so we're serious about solving that problem. And we're not here to, raise money and be famous. We're here to watch walls crumble. And that was really the very hardcore mission of this company, and it still is.
Well, thank you very much, Calvin. That is the best way to end this showcase. And I appreciate the seriousness of your talk, even though you could talk about it in bounds and scope. So back to you, Adam. I think we're back to
yes. Yeah, I think that was a wonderful ending to this entire showcase, and I believe we're going to bring Patricia back on the stage. And everyone, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the presentations, and we'll talk to y'all soon.
Thank you, Adam and Brian. Great session. So that concludes the Fed Supernova programming today. Huge thanks to the startups, our speakers, our partners, IBM and Microsoft, and you, our audience, for the awesome day. We still have 20 minutes of networking after this, and tomorrow, an exciting day of programming exploring digital engineering and model-based systems engineering, as well as autonomy, robotics, drones, all culminating in a $100,000 pitch competition. Until then, see you in networking.